Hi, and welcome to the Stock Scores Market Minutes for October 1st, 2018. This week I want to talk about trading human emotions. You see, humans are inherently bad traders. They are emotional and they succumb to fear and greed. You should know this about yourself, and you should know it about all of the other traders out there and seek to take advantage of it. That means buying in advance of greed and shorting in advance of fear. Now, when stocks start to uptick, when they start to build volume, they are going to gather the crowd and create the greed that will bring in more traders. And you want to get onto that train in its early stages. However, once it's been underway for a while, recognize that these stocks that have extreme strength will eventually collapse, and you will get fear that comes out of that. So after extreme strength comes fear, and in the beginning of strength comes greed. Now, when I show you this week's trade of the week, I'll show you exactly how that played out on Friday with a stock that I traded. All right, let's get into this week's analysis, starting off with the US markets, and of course always with the S&P 500. The S&P 500 in this upward trend, which was broken last week, I think on some concerns that there might not be a trade deal with NAFTA. And of course, we also had trade concerns with China. Now, over the weekend, NAFTA has a tentative agreement, so that could be the break higher that we need to break out of this, although there are still concerns with China. But for now, I'm going to put this as a neutral rating. That could change on Monday if we get a strong open. Moving along to the long-term chart, really nothing new here, even though we had that bit of weakness on the weekend, or pardon me, on Friday and late last week. We are still in an upward trend. Trading range is very narrow and really no concern the buyers are in control longer term. On the Russell 2000, which of course is the small caps, we've had a bit of a lull. The market's been in this downward sloping channel, and if you like to trade the lower price stocks, you will know that generally there hasn't been a lot going on. There have been a few stocks that are very hot, and those few stocks are worth trading, but in general, looking at the smaller cap stocks, not a lot of action. All right, moving along to the Canadian markets, we'll start with the TSX 60, and you can see the effects of the NAFTA concerns. There was that selling pressure on Friday. Of course, the deadline was Sunday, September 30th, and a lot of people thinking that nothing was going to happen, and so we had some selling pressure on Friday in the Canadian market. That should reverse given the news that has come out late Sunday, but we shall see how that pans out. Longer term, we remain in that sort of sideways range we've been in for some time. We're holding support, but we're certainly not looking awesome. But that, again, could change very quickly because I think the Canadian market has been handcuffed by NAFTA. Onto the TSX Venture, which showed a little life as the summer was coming to a close and cannabis stocks moving in anticipation of the legalization of cannabis in Canada. However, in general, you're also being bogged down on the TSX Venture by weakness in mining. So it's been kind of a dead market, but typically it starts to get going October till May. And so I want you to watch this market for a breakout through that level there, which would be from a rising bottom, and that'll show you that life is coming back. So keep an eye on that. For now, still not looking too awesome. Onto the currency market, we'll start with the US dollar, which had a pretty good jump at the end of last week, and that gives us that flag break on the weekly chart of the UUP, which is the US dollar index. There's the flag, there's the break, and that points toward further strength in the US dollar. It held support. I was a little concerned about it last week, but it's holding support, breaking up, and that should lead to a higher US dollar near term. Now, when we look at the Canadian dollar, we would expect it to do the opposite given the strength in the US dollar. But remember, the US dollar ETF, UUP, is the US dollar index. So it's a basket of currencies against the US dollar, not solely the Canadian one. In fact, not even mostly the Canadian one. And so when we look at the Canadian dollar, we actually see a little bit of a comeback despite those concerns about NAFTA. And we have broken the downward trend there from a rising bottom. So signs are there. I wouldn't say they're strong signs yet, but signs are there that the Canadian dollar looks to go higher in the near term. And we'll see how it works out this week on some NAFTA news. Interest rates, always just simply look at the TLT, which is the ETF reflective of the 20-year bonds in the US, the treasuries. And we've held support, had a little bit of an upward move this past week, and we're just sort of keep holding that support level that is held many times, but we haven't really broken the downward trend yet, so I think there is still the potential for a breakdown through support, and that would mean rising interest rates. For now, not there, but something to keep an eye on. Look for a breakdown through 116 on a closing basis on the weekly chart as a sign that interest rates are going higher. Now on to commodities. Let's take a look at gold, which suffered at the end of the week here. This is the weekly chart, but it suffered because of that strength in the US dollar. And to me, it looks like the downward trend is still holding. We could be breaking down, looking for further weakness. Next stop for support is down around there. So I'm still not that excited about being a buyer of gold or gold stocks. It was showing a little bit of stability for the last 4 or 5 weeks without really breaking higher. And it seems like the sellers are getting motivated again on gold. Not the same can be said for oil, despite the strength in the US dollar. Gold breaking out to new highs, or to new local highs anyway. So the upward trend has held. We're breaking out of this little ascending triangle, and that should lead to a continuation of the upward sloping channel. Probably has another week or two of upside before it hits the top of that channel and then perhaps pulls back for a couple of weeks. So my ratings then, bullish on US stocks. I lowered the rating to neutral short term just because there was a little bit of weakness in the latter half of last week. I think that could get negated this coming week. We'll see. Canadian stocks, neutral long term, bearish short term, but that bearish rating could get negated. It was really that selling pressure on Friday that made me put the bearish rating on there. Gold bearish on both time frames, and oil bullish on both time frames. US stocks remain in a long-term upward trend, but the buyers are showing some hesitancy short-term. Canadian stocks weakened Friday on trade concerns, which should reverse this weekend on a NAFTA deal. Gold softening on a strong US dollar, and oil breaking out despite it. All right, let's take a look at a chart of a stock that I traded on Friday to really drive home the fear and greed concept. This is a 2-minute chart, 2-day, 2-minute chart. And I bought it there early in the morning when it started to show life. You can see the life there. I've got some algorithms built to find those things before most people do. That's my action candle indicator. And wrote it up. Nice, really a great run higher. And I sold it when it started to show some weakness. I can't recall the exact time, but somewhere in there. Now, what's interesting is here you've got a stock that more than tripled, right? It started at $2.50, it went to $7.50, and then it retested $7.50. But what I always like to see is when you have stocks like this that make a double top, and then they break down right there from a falling top. So see how that top there is a little lower than that one. That really shows that the bubble is bursting. Here's a stock that moved up huge, had really captured the greed of the market. And then you get a break of that greed. You get the upward trend broken from a falling top, and that's like the bubble bursting, and that tells you that fear is going to come in. It didn't come in very quickly. It took probably more than half an hour, but that is a good signal to short. And then look what happens. This one probably more so than most, but it went right back to where it started the day, up 300%, and then basically ending the day at even. Fear and greed. There's your greed, here's your fear. A great example of how you can take advantage of human emotion in the market. Well, that has been the Stock Scorers Market Minutes. If you've liked this week's Market Minutes, please click on that like button, subscribe to the channel, and most importantly, trade well.